The screams echoed through the ruins. For decades, humans had maintained an uneasy peace with the other species of the known galaxy. Their peculiar, volatile nature tolerated more than respected. But on that day, the day humanity lost control, the galaxy learned what humans were truly capable of. It was not a victory nor a defeat. It was something else entirely, something that would never fade from the collective memory of all sentient beings. If you're ready for a story of betrayal, survival, and a decision that would echo across millennia, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement helps us bring stories like this to life. The Galactic Concord, a fragile treaty holding dozens of advanced species in a precarious balance, had always viewed humanity as an oddity. The humans, relatively new to the interstellar stage, were unpredictable and deeply emotional. They were not the strongest, fastest, or most technologically advanced, yet their ingenuity had earned them a grudging place in the galactic community. Most species regarded humans with a mixture of fascination and unease. A species that laughed too loudly, mourned too deeply, and held grudges with unnerving tenacity. For years, this eccentricity was harmless. Humanity contributed as any other species did, trading, innovating, and providing an odd kind of social glue at galactic summits with their insistence on celebration and ritual. But there were whispers, dark murmurs traded in the shadows of neon-lit colonies and ancient alien archives. Stories of humanity's past, of wars that scorched continents, of genocides committed for reasons other species could scarcely comprehend. Many believed these were exaggerations, tales spun to frighten children or discredit humanity's growing influence. Then came the Tracer conflict. The Tracer, a militaristic reptilian species, were an old power in the galaxy, their empires spanning thousands of systems. Ruthless and efficient, they viewed humanity's emotional volatility as a weakness, a liability to the Concord's stability. When the humans proposed expanding their trade routes into Tracer-controlled space, the Tracer responded with an ultimatum: stay out or face annihilation. No one expected humanity to fight back. The Tracer fleets were vast, their technology decades ahead of Earth's hastily constructed warships. The Concord Council pleaded for diplomacy, urging humanity to stand down and avoid provoking a species that had crushed rebellions for sport. But the humans were unyielding. They spoke of sovereignty, of principle, of refusing to be bullied. At first, the conflict was confined to skirmishes at the edges of Tracer space. It was brutal but contained. Humans, as always, proved resourceful. They fought with unconventional tactics, using strategies that other species deemed reckless but often effective. The Tracers suffered losses, and for a time, it seemed humanity might hold their own. But then, the massacre at Zalera Prime changed everything. Zalera Prime was a human colony, a thriving hub of trade and culture on the frontier. It was there that the Tracer made their declaration of dominance, wiping out the entire colony in a single bombardment. Billions of lives extinguished in an instant. The images broadcast of the galaxy were horrifying. Cities reduced to craters, oceans boiling under orbital fire. The Tracer called it a warning. Humanity called it genocide. Something broke in the collective human psyche that day. It wasn't grief, though grief was there in abundance. It wasn't anger, though the fury was palpable. No, it was something deeper, something primal. For the first time in centuries, humanity's darkest instincts rose to the surface, and they acted. When the Concord convened to mediate, humanity refused to attend. When allies offered to negotiate on their behalf, they were met with cold silence. The Tracer, confident in their superiority, dismissed humanity as beaten and began preparing for a final assault. Then, humanity unleashed the Aegis Protocol. No one outside of Earth's Intermilitary Council had heard of the protocol, and when it was revealed, even humanity's staunchest allies recoiled in disbelief. The Aegis Protocol was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It was a strategy, one born of desperation and a deep understanding of human nature. Its goal was simple: survival at any cost, even if it meant dragging the enemy and perhaps the galaxy into hell alongside them. The first wave of Aegis involved technology humanity had kept hidden. Devices designed not for victory, but for catastrophic escalation. Star detonators capable of turning entire systems into supernovas, self-replicating nanite swarms that consumed anything organic or mechanical in their path, AI-driven war machines with no loyalty except to their mission. The Tracer fleet encountered these horrors on the edges of human space. The initial battles were so one-sided that survivors spoke not of war, but of nightmares. Ships disintegrated under impossible gravitational distortions. Soldiers were reduced to ash before they could comprehend the threat. Planets vanished, leaving only silence. The galaxy watched in stunned horror as humanity abandoned every convention, every rule of engagement the Concord had ever established. The Tracer, once so arrogant, found themselves on the defensive, their empire burning as they scrambled to contain the onslaught. But humanity wasn't finished. They wanted the Tracer to feel what Zalera Prime had felt, to know the depth of loss. As the war escalated, rumors spread of atrocities committed by human forces. Entire Tracer colonies wiped out, not for tactical advantage, but as acts of vengeance. The Concord begged humanity to stop, to remember their shared principles. But humanity was deaf to their pleas. The final blow came when Earth broadcast a single message to the galaxy. This ends when the Tracer ceased to exist. The galaxy, once united in its disdain for the Tracer's tyranny, now looked upon humanity with dread. The question on everyone's lips was no longer who would win the war, but whether humanity would stop before there was nothing left to save. And deep within the ruins of the Concord's ideals, a darker question began to emerge. What if they can't stop? The Tracer homeworld, Vakarath, burned beneath an unrelenting barrage of fire. Its once pristine cities, sprawling metropolises of crystalline spires and shimmering domes, were reduced to molten slag. The skies, once a deep emerald hue, now glowed an ominous orange from the inferno consuming the planet's surface. Across the galaxy, countless species tuned into live feeds of the devastation, unable to turn away. They had seen humanity's fury before, but this was annihilation. Human fleets orbited the planet, a grim, silent armada that no longer bothered with diplomacy or posturing. Each vessel, bristling with experimental weaponry, loomed like a harbinger of doom. Within their warships, human commanders operated with an eerie detachment, their faces devoid of triumph or remorse. This was no longer war, it was extermination. The Concord's desperate attempts to intervene had failed spectacularly. Mediation efforts were ignored, their emissaries treated as little more than static on humanity's comms. Even the once powerful allied species of humanity, the avian Arctolans and the crystalline Erevka, had withdrawn, too fearful of being associated with the carnage. For humanity, alliances no longer mattered. Only vengeance did. Deep within the lead battleship, the indomitable Admiral Sarai Novik stared at the burning world below. Her jaw was tight, her eyes hollow. Around her, the bridge crew moved with mechanical efficiency, avoiding her gaze. Sarai had been at Zalera Prime. She had seen the destruction firsthand, had held dying colonists in her arms as the atmosphere vented into space. She had sworn then that she would never allow humanity to be victimized again. But now, as Vakarath burned, she felt no satisfaction, only an aching, gnawing emptiness. "Admiral," her tactical officer said, breaking the tense silence. "The planet's defenses have been neutralized. No signs of resistance remain." Sarai nodded but didn't respond. She knew what came next, what the protocol demanded. The officer hesitated. "Ma'am, there are still civilian life signs across the planet. Millions of them." The weight of the words hung in the air. Civilians, non-combatants. The Concord's laws were clear. Civilians were never to be targeted. But humanity had left those laws behind the moment the first star detonator had been deployed. Execute the protocol, Sarai said, her voice devoid of emotion. The officer hesitated, his fingers hovering over the console. Admiral, if we... Execute the protocol, Sarai repeated, more forcefully this time. Her voice cut through the tension like a blade. The officer obeyed. From the fleet, a wave of dreadnought-class missiles descended upon Vakarath. They weren't designed for tactical precision, but for maximum destruction. When they struck, the planet fractured. Entire continents disintegrated. Oceans boiled into steam, and the crust split open, exposing molten veins that consumed what little remained. The galaxy would remember this moment as the death knell of the Tracer, but they would also remember what followed. As the Tracer Empire crumbled, the galaxy erupted in chaos. Species once content to remain neutral suddenly found themselves questioning humanity's role in the Concord. Whispers of rebellion spread through the ranks of human colonies, with citizens demanding an end to the war and the unchecked power of the military. Yet humanity's leadership refused to relent. They spoke of total security and final justice, justifying their actions with the same unyielding rhetoric that had led them down this dark path. On the planet of Erythra, a neutral colony that had once served as a Concord diplomatic hub, representatives from dozens of species gathered to discuss humanity's future. It was there that the seeds of resistance began to take root. Humanity has become a threat to us all, said Kodinare, a revered elder of the Erevka. His crystalline body shimmered as he spoke, refracting light into a kaleidoscope of colors. They have abandoned reason, forsaken empathy. If we do not act, they will consume us just as they consumed the Tracer. But what can we do? Countered Lysera, an Arctulan envoy. Her avian features were taut with anxiety. Their technology is beyond anything we've seen. Their willingness to destroy themselves makes them unpredictable. How do you fight an enemy that has no fear of its own demise? The room fell silent. For all their grievances, the species of the Concord had no answer. Meanwhile, on Earth, the cracks were beginning to show. Civil unrest surged as more and more humans questioned the cost of their survival. The once united resolve of humanity fractured into factions, those who supported the relentless war effort and those who believed it was time to seek peace, no matter the cost. Amid this turmoil, a message was intercepted by Concord spies. It was a broadcast, unencrypted and simple, sent from Earth to the surviving members of the Concord Council. The message read, "Humanity has not lost control. We have found clarity, and if you stand against us, you will burn just as the Tracer did." The galaxy reeled. For the first time in millennia, the Concord faced an existential crisis, not from an external threat, but from one of its own members. And as humanity continued its relentless march, whispers began to spread among the surviving species. Whispers of a coalition, of an alliance forged not for prosperity, but for survival. They called it the Memory Pact, a vow to ensure that the atrocities of humanity would never be repeated. But even as they planned, there was one question they could not escape. Had humanity truly lost itself? Or had it merely revealed the truth that had been buried beneath centuries of civilization? The galaxy would soon find out. The Memory Pact was formed in secret, its architects bound by desperation and a fragile hope. Representatives from the most advanced species in the Concord met in the shadowed depths of Erythra's underground archives, far from the prying eyes of human informants. Among them were the Erevka, their crystalline forms dimmed in mourning for a shattered galaxy. The Arctulans, their feathers ruffled in barely contained fear, and the insectoid Dracthra, whose chittering voices carried an urgency the others struggled to ignore. Each species brought their own scars to the table. The Tracer genocide had shaken them, but it was the aftermath. The brutal precision with which humanity dismantled every trace of Tracer culture that sent waves of terror rippling through the stars. Humanity's message was clear. Those who opposed them would not only lose the war, but their very existence, erased from memory as if they had never been. "We cannot fight them directly," Kodinare intoned, his crystalline voice resonating across the chamber. Their weapons are too advanced, their resolve too unyielding. But there are other ways to bring down a predator. Starve it, isolate it, turn its strength into its weakness. Isolation will not work. His Shivarak. The Drachma emissary, their compound eyes glinting in the low light. Humanity thrives in solitude. They will retreat to their worlds and grow stronger, biding their time until they can strike again. Then we give them no time, Lysera replied, her avian talons tapping nervously against the table. We must act now, before they consolidate further power. A strike against their leadership, perhaps a coordinated assassination. Kolden Ra's refracted light dimmed in disapproval. To strike at their leaders would only solidify their resolve. You do not understand humanity. They are a hydra. Cut off one head, and two will grow in its place. No, we must be more subtle. We must sow division among them, exploit the fractures already forming within their society. Even as the pact members debated, humanity continued its campaign of destruction. The Tracer were gone, but their worlds, rich in resources and strategic value, were rapidly being claimed by human colonists. These settlers were not the jubilant pioneers of old but grim-faced survivors, refugees from Zalera Prime and other worlds that had been destroyed in the conflict. They worked tirelessly, driven by a single purpose: to ensure that humanity would never be vulnerable again. But beneath the surface of human society, dissent was growing. On the industrial megacity of New Damascus, riots broke out as civilians protested the government's relentless war policies. Signs reading, "Not in our name and enough blood," were trampled underfoot as military forces moved in to suppress the unrest. Across the human colonies, whispers of rebellion spread, carried by encrypted networks and clandestine gatherings. Admiral Sarai Novik, once the face of humanity's resistance, now found herself at the center of a storm she could not control. In private moments, she stared at the cracked photograph of her family, a husband and 2 children lost on Zalera Prime, and wondered if the path she had chosen was worth the cost. Her doubts grew louder when a transmission reached her private terminal, bypassing all security protocols. It was an encrypted message, signed by a name she hadn't heard in years. Commander Elias Vren, a former comrade turned dissident. "Sarai," the message began, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "You and I both know this can't continue. The Tracer are gone, but we've become something worse than they ever were. If you have any part of yourself left that remembers what we used to fight for, meet me. We need to talk." Sarai's hand hovered over the delete command. To respond to such a message was treason. Yet something within her, a faint echo of the idealism she had once carried, compelled her to hesitate. Meanwhile, the memory pack prepared its first strike. It would not be a battle, nor an assassination, but something far more insidious. The pact had identified a weakness in humanity's infrastructure, their reliance on AI and quantum communication networks. By infiltrating these systems, the pact planned to sow chaos within humanity's ranks, disrupting their coordination and amplifying internal divisions. The operation, codenamed Oblivion's Whisper, was launched on the fringes of human-controlled space. Concord agents slipped past human defenses, using cloaked vessels equipped with ancient technology immune to modern AI detection. Their target was the Relay Nexus, a sprawling station that served as the backbone of humanity's interstellar communication. Inside the Nexus, human engineers worked in shifts to maintain the station's delicate systems. They were unprepared for the assault that followed. Concord agents unleashed a viral AI, one designed not to destroy but to corrupt. It planted false orders, fabricated communications, and altered critical data, turning humanity's greatest strength into its most profound vulnerability. Within hours, the effects rippled across human space. Fleet movements were thrown into disarray as commanders received contradictory orders. Colonies found themselves cut off from vital supplies, their distress calls intercepted and ignored. And amidst the confusion, rebellion ignited. On New Damascus, Protesters seized control of a weapons depot, arming themselves against the military forces sent to suppress them. Similar uprisings flared on other colonies, their leaders emboldened by the chaos. For the first time, humanity's unity began to fracture. In the midst of this turmoil, Sarai Novik made her decision, against her better judgment and at great personal risk. She arranged a secret meeting with Elias Vren on the barren moon of Corvos. The two former allies faced each other in the shadow of an abandoned mining outpost, their expressions marked by years of loss and regret. "Elias," Sarai began, her voice heavy, "if you brought me here to lecture me, save your breath. I've heard it all before." "I didn't come to lecture," Elias replied. "I came to ask you a question. When you look at what we've done, what we've become, do you still recognize us? Do you recognize yourself?" Sarai didn't answer immediately. She looked out at the desolate landscape, her thoughts a whirlwind of doubt and anger. "We did what we had to do," she said finally. "We survived, but at what cost?" Elias pressed. "We've turned the entire galaxy against us. Even our own people are starting to question whether survival is worth this price. You're one of the few who can still change the course we're on, but only if you're willing to fight for what's right. Not for revenge, not for power, but for humanity's soul." Sarai clenched her fists, torn between loyalty to her cause and the nagging voice of her conscience. The decision she made in that moment would determine the fate of her people and the galaxy itself. In the dark void of space, the echoes of humanity's disarray rippled farther than even the memory pact had anticipated. The viral AI unleashed in Oblivion's whisper spread like wildfire, infiltrating not just the relay nexus but critical systems across human-controlled space. Entire fleets drifted aimlessly, their navigation protocols scrambled. Agricultural colonies reported mass crop failures as climate control systems malfunctioned. And on the fringe worlds, once thriving settlements fell silent, abandoned as their infrastructure collapsed. But the viral AI's most devastating blow was not its immediate effects. It was the paranoia it sowed. Humanity's leaders, already strained by internal rebellions and mounting pressure, began to turn on each other. Accusations of sabotage and treachery spread like a plague. High-ranking officials were detained or executed without trial, their supposed conspiracies fabricated by the very systems they relied on. Amid this chaos, Sarai Novik returned to the Indomitable, her mind heavy with Elias Vren's words. She had left their meeting with no promises, unwilling to admit how deeply his plea had affected her. Yet as she walked the silent corridors of her flagship, her resolve began to waver. The reports streaming in from across human space told a grim story. One of desperation, collapse, and a people on the brink of losing their identity. On the bridge, her crew worked with a frantic urgency, their faces pale and drawn. Commander Mikhail Reyes, her second-in-command, approached her with a data pad in hand. "Admiral, we've lost contact with 5 more colonies. 2 were confirmed to have joined the rebellion. The others we don't know." Sarai took the pad, skimming the reports. Each line of text felt like a dagger twisting in her chest. "How much longer can we hold out like this?" she asked quietly, more to herself than to Reyes. Reyes hesitated before answering. "If we can't reestablish control within the next cycle, our logistical networks will collapse completely. The fleets won't have fuel, the colonies won't have food. It'll be over." Sarai nodded, her expression unreadable. She dismissed Reyes with a curt gesture and retreated to her quarters. Once inside, she stared at the cracked photograph on her desk. The faces of her family seemed to accuse her, their eyes asking a question she couldn't answer. Meanwhile, the memory pact moved to capitalize on the chaos. Their agents worked tirelessly to stoke the fires of rebellion, spreading propaganda and arming dissident factions within human colonies. They knew they couldn't defeat humanity militarily, but they could push it to devour itself. On the rebel-controlled colony of Aegis 7, a turning point was brewing. The colony had declared its independence weeks earlier, refusing to contribute resources to the war effort. In response, the human military blockaded the planet, cutting off all trade and supplies. The blockade was meant to starve the rebels into submission, but instead, it galvanized them. Underground networks smuggled weapons and supplies to the surface, and the colony's leaders began to organize a full-scale resistance. The Memory Pact saw an opportunity. Disguising themselves as rogue traders, their agents infiltrated Aegis 7 and offered the rebels advanced technology, stolen from humanity itself. These weapons, powered by the same AI systems that humanity had once wielded with pride, were turned against their creators. When the blockade forces attempted to land on Aegis 7, they were met with a coordinated assault unlike anything they had expected. Rebel forces used guerrilla tactics, ambushing landing parties and sabotaging supply ships. The once proud fleets of humanity, already stretched thin, were forced into a humiliating retreat. The victory on Aegis 7 sent shockwaves through human space. Other colonies, inspired by the rebel success, began to rise up. The rebellion was no longer a scattered series of protests, but a full-fledged movement. Sarai Novik watched these events unfold from the Indomitable, her doubts growing with every report. The war she had once fought to protect her people had become a war against her own kind. The lines between friend and enemy, loyalty and betrayal, had blurred beyond recognition. Her breaking point came when she received a direct order from Earth's High Command. The message, encrypted and marked priority, instructed her to deploy a star detonator against Aegis 7. The colony, they claimed, was too dangerous to be allowed to exist. Its destruction would serve as a warning to other rebels. Sarai stared at the order, her hands trembling. The star detonator was humanity's most devastating weapon, a device capable of destabilizing a star and annihilating an entire system. She had authorized its use against the Tracer, but that had been against an alien enemy, not her own people. Reyes entered her quarters, his expression grim. "Admiral, the fleet is ready to move. We await your command." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a pain he had never seen before. "Do you believe in what we're doing, Mikhail?" she asked softly. Reyes hesitated, then nodded. "I believe in you, Admiral, and I believe that humanity's survival depends on us. But at what cost?" she whispered, echoing Elias Vren's words. Reyes didn't respond. He stood there for a moment longer, then saluted and left the room. Alone, Sarai made her decision. She transmitted new orders to the fleet. The blockade of Aegis 7 would remain in place, but the star detonator would not be deployed. Instead, she would attempt to open negotiations with the rebels, despite the risks. The decision was met with immediate backlash. High Command branded her a traitor, stripping her of her rank and issuing a warrant for her arrest. The Indomitable became a rogue ship, its crew divided between those loyal to Sarai and those who still followed Earth's orders. As the ship drifted through uncharted space, Sarai received another message from Elias Vren. This time, it was a single line. "Welcome to the rebellion." The Indomitable drifted in the black expanse of uncharted space, its engines humming in a soft, almost mournful rhythm. The crew was divided, half loyal to Sarai Novik, the other half uncertain, questioning whether they had made the right choice in defying Earth orders. The rebellion was growing, yes, but so was the uncertainty of what humanity would become if it continued down this path. For Sarai, every moment of silence in the crew quarters felt suffocating. The weight of her decision sat heavily on her shoulders, but there was no turning back now. High Command had branded her a traitor, but the rebellion was her only hope of saving humanity from itself. As she walked the ship's corridors, she could feel the cold glares of the crew members who didn't agree with her, their distrust like an invisible barrier she couldn't cross. And yet, she didn't blame them. How could they understand? The rebellion, now led by a coalition of defectors from within humanity's own ranks and a growing alliance of disaffected species, had begun to form an organized resistance. It was a fragile thing, held together by the remnants of lost hope and the promise of a better future, but it was the last chance for survival. Sarai had once believed that humanity was destined to rise above its flaws, but now she wasn't so sure. The question loomed larger with every passing hour. Could humanity redeem itself, or had it already fallen too far? Meanwhile, the Memory Pact, with its alliances forged in secrecy and betrayal, was not content to let humanity spiral into chaos. They had seen the potential for destruction in the wake of human warfare, and now, as the rebellion gained ground, they began to shift tactics. They couldn't allow humanity to rise again, not even in the form of a fractured, dissenting rebellion. If humanity succeeded in reforming itself, they would emerge stronger than ever, and the galaxy's tenuous peace would shatter for good. One planet stood at the center of this growing conflict: Aegis 7, a former human colony, now firmly under the control of the rebel faction, had become the symbolic heart of the rebellion. If Aegis 7 could hold, it would send a message to the galaxy that humanity was not completely lost, that there was still hope for reform. But if the rebellion failed, the galaxy would understand that humanity's path to destruction was irreversible, and they would no longer be welcome in the Concord or any other alliance. On Aegis 7, the rebel leaders met in secret, their voices low and filled with the weight of what was to come. The atmosphere on the war-torn world was tense. Every shadow held the threat of betrayal. Every sudden movement could be a harbinger of disaster. Elias Vren, now one of the most powerful leaders in the rebellion, stood before a holographic map of the galaxy, his face tight with anxiety. "We cannot afford to fail," he said, his voice cold, his gaze unwavering. "Aegis 7 must hold. If we lose this planet, the rebellion will collapse. Humanity's last hope will be lost." The room fell silent. Among the leaders were those who had once served humanity's military might, warriors who had fought on the front lines, who knew what it meant to fight for survival. But now, they fought for something more elusive, for the soul of their species. The air crackled with uncertainty, but the resolve was there, hidden beneath layers of fear and exhaustion. They could only pray that they were strong enough to withstand what was coming. Sarai's mind, however, was far from the preparations on Aegis 7. Her thoughts drifted to Earth, the planet that had once been the cradle of all that was good and pure in humanity. It was now a shadow of its former self, controlled by a fractured government that had lost sight of everything it had once stood for. Sarai could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. Her birthplace, her people, her family. Had they truly lost everything? Was there any chance of redemption left for them? Or was this the inevitable end of a species that had reached too far, too fast? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime, a message flashing across her terminal. It was an encrypted transmission, a simple line of text that shook her to her core. It was from someone she hadn't expected to hear from again, her old mentor, General Rainer Voss. "You've made the right choice, Sarai, but there's more at stake than you realize. The rebellion is only a part of the equation. There are forces far older than humanity that are watching. The path you're on may lead to salvation, but it will also bring about something far worse than the destruction of the trace, sir. I'll explain soon. Trust no one, not even me." The message was chilling in its simplicity. Sarai had trusted Raynor once, but now, with the weight of the galaxy's collapse upon her shoulders, she wasn't sure who she could trust anymore. Trust no one. The words reverberated in her mind, a warning too late, a command she wasn't sure she could follow. As the Indomitable pushed farther into the unknown regions of space, Sarai knew that they were rapidly running out of time. The rebellion needed unity to survive, but the fractures within humanity were too deep to ignore. And now, as she watched her crew grow increasingly tense, she wondered if the rebellion itself might become the catalyst for the galaxy's final unraveling. The battle for Aegis 7 loomed. But Sarai knew that what happened next would determine not only the future of humanity, but the fate of all life in the galaxy. The Memory Pact was watching, the Concord was watching, and most ominously, Something far older than any of them was beginning to stir, an ancient force that had once shaped the rise and fall of entire civilizations. Sarai had no choice but to move forward. The rebellion might just be humanity's last chance at redemption, but it could also be the beginning of its final undoing. The rebellion had grown too large to ignore. HFY, once a mere colony on the edge of humanity's sphere, had now become the flashpoint for an entire species' fate. The humans who still supported Earth's fractured government were losing ground, unable to coordinate effectively due to the sabotage of the AI systems and the growing momentum of the rebellion. The high command on Earth was splintering, with many of its officials turning against each other in a scramble for power. Sarai Novik sat in the war room of the Indomitable, surrounded by her closest advisors, the air thick with tension. It had been weeks since she defied Earth orders, and her once unwavering belief in humanity's cause was slowly unraveling. What had once been clear, survival at all costs, now felt like a hollow justification. The galaxy was watching them. The rebellion had become a test, not just for humanity's survival, but for whether any remnants of the soul of the species remained. The transmissions from HFY were coming faster now, each one more desperate than the last. Rebel forces, though stronger than they had ever been, were losing ground against the relentless onslaught of Earth's military. And the Memory Pact, though an unseen hand, was stirring the pot, fanning the flames of war, pushing humanity closer to a precipice from which they could never return. Sarai's mind was elsewhere, weighed down by the cryptic message from General Rainer Voss. She had heard rumors about the ancient forces that existed in the galaxy, but she had dismissed them as just that, rumors. Yet, the timing of Rainer's warning was too precise to ignore. Was there something beyond the political intrigue and military strategy that they were overlooking? Mikhail, Sarai spoke suddenly, her voice laced with both fatigue and resolve. Commander Mikhail Reyes, standing across from her, straightened. "What's the situation on HFY? We've lost contact with the main defense fleet," Reyes replied, his tone tight with the weight of the information. "The rebels are holding, but there's been a significant increase in enemy activity. Earth has sent reinforcements. If they don't hold the outer perimeter, Aegis will fall within the next few cycles." Sarai's eyes narrowed. The plan had been to defend HFY at all costs, but as the rebellion spread, they were running out of resources. "We can't lose Aegis," she muttered under her breath, but even as she said it, the doubt lingered. She had never believed it would come to this, to a point where she would question the very foundation of her decisions. The rebellion had been a lifeline, a hope to turn the tide. But now, it felt as though they were driving toward a cliff, with nothing but an abyss ahead. A beep from her console cut through the silence. A message had arrived. This one was not from HFY, nor from the Indomitable's fleet. It was another encrypted transmission. Sarai's stomach churned as she saw the sender, General Rainer Voss. The message read, "It's time. Meet me at the Citadel of Seers. There, you'll find the truth about what you're really fighting. But understand this. Once you take the step, there's no turning back. Everything you think you know will be challenged. You'll either destroy humanity's last chance or finally see the way forward. Your choice." The words echoed in Sarai's mind, chilling her to the core. The Citadel of Seers. It was an ancient structure, hidden away in the farthest reaches of known space, a place shrouded in myth and legend. Some believed it held the answers to questions no one dared ask. Others believed it was simply the final resting place of an extinct civilization. But now, it was the key to everything. Sarai's hands shook as she read the message again, considering the choices before her. To follow Rainer was to take a risk, a leap into the unknown that might not lead to redemption, but destruction. Yet, to continue down the path of rebellion, to fight for humanity's survival with no understanding of what truly lay ahead, was equally dangerous. "Mikhail," Sarai said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "Prepare the ship for a course to the Citadel of Seers. We're going there." Reyes stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Admiral, we're in the middle of a war. Aegis 7. I know, Sarai interrupted, her gaze unwavering. But there's something bigger at play here, something none of us fully understand. We can't keep fighting in the dark. We need answers. We need to understand what's really happening before we lose everything. Reyes opened his mouth to protest, but saw the resolve in her eyes and knew better than to argue. Instead, he nodded, his face set in grim determination. Aye, Admiral. Course set for the Citadel of Seers. As the Indomitable began to move into deep space, Sarai felt the weight of the decision settle upon her. There was no going back now. They were venturing into unknown territory, not just in space, but in the very fabric of what it meant to be human. What awaited them at the Citadel could change everything, or it could confirm their darkest fears, that humanity had gone too far and there was no coming back from the precipice. The journey to the Citadel would take days, maybe weeks. But Sarai couldn't wait. Aegis 7 was hanging by a thread, and every passing moment brought them closer to either salvation or total annihilation. She could only hope that the answers they would find would give them a way forward, or confirm the truth that they were already lost. The ship sped into the dark unknown, toward the Citadel of Seers, and toward a future neither Sarai nor any of her crew could predict. The Indomitable surged through the emptiness of space, a ship on a desperate mission that no one fully understood. Sarai had given the order, and now there was no turning back. As the ship moved toward the Citadel of Seers, the crew fell into a tense silence, each person lost in their thoughts, wondering what lay ahead. The rebellion was losing ground. Aegis 7 was hanging by a thread, and the message from General Rainer Voss had only added to the confusion. The Citadel was a place of mystery and legend, one of the oldest known structures in the galaxy. It had been abandoned long before humanity discovered the stars, and it was said that only a handful of beings, those who possessed knowledge of the galaxy's hidden history, knew of its true significance. Some called it a temple, others a tomb, but few believed it held any real answers. The idea that it might hold the key to understanding what was happening to humanity, that it could provide a path forward, was both thrilling and terrifying. The journey took days, and as they neared their destination, Sarai found herself increasingly restless. She spent hours in the war room, her mind turning over every possibility, every danger. The memory pack's influence was everywhere, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the entire galaxy was on the edge of something far worse than even the destruction of Aegis 7. Admiral, Mikhail Reyes called from the door, breaking her thoughts. We're approaching the Citadel's coordinates. It's unlike anything we've seen before. Sarai stood and walked toward the viewport. Beyond the glass, a massive structure loomed, a vast, ancient city of stone and metal, its surface covered in strange symbols that seemed to shimmer in the light of the distant stars. It was impossible to tell how old it was, but its sheer size was enough to take the breath away. It had been untouched by time, preserved in a way that defied explanation. The ship slowly decelerated, maneuvering toward the outer edges of the Citadel. Sarai felt her heart race. This was it, the moment that could change everything. The crew was already preparing for what might come next, their unease palpable. This was a place no human had set foot in for centuries, and the unknowns were terrifying. What if they found nothing? What if the answers they sought only led to more questions? Sarai turned back to Reyes, her voice steady despite the anxiety gnawing at her. Have we detected any signs of life? Reyes shook his head. No, Admiral, but there's something strange. We've picked up faint energy readings from deep within the Citadel. It's not much, but there's something down there. Then we'll have to go down there, Sarai replied, her decision made. She couldn't let hesitation stop them now, not when they were so close to finding answers. The Indomitable touched down in a large clearing just outside the Citadel. The planet they had landed on was barren, its surface pockmarked by craters and ancient ruins. The air was thick with the weight of centuries, and there was an eerie stillness that pervaded the place. It was as though the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, Sarai, Reyes, and a small contingent of soldiers gathered their gear and prepared to disembark. The crew, though filled with trepidation, followed her lead, their eyes betraying their fear as they stepped off the ship and onto the alien soil. The citadel towered above them, its ancient architecture both awe-inspiring and intimidating. The structures around them were monumental, their surfaces etched with markings that seemed to move when viewed from different angles. As they approached the entrance, Sarai could feel the weight of the place pressing down on her. This was no ordinary building. It was a relic, a testament to a time long gone, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it was alive in some way, as though it were aware of their presence. The door to the citadel slid open with a low, grinding sound, revealing a darkened corridor within. The air inside was cool, almost otherworldly, and the faint hum of energy reverberated through the walls. The team moved cautiously forward, their footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness of the citadel. As they ventured deeper into the heart of the citadel, they encountered strange symbols carved into the walls, symbols that seemed to pulse with an inner light. Sarai's mind raced. These were not human markings. They were ancient, perhaps older than the galaxy itself. The place was a labyrinth, its corridors twisting in ways that defied logic. The architecture was alien, yet somehow familiar, as if it belonged to a time before the rise of humanity, before the known galaxy had been mapped. After what felt like hours of wandering through the maze-like halls, they finally reached a large chamber at the center of the citadel. The room was vast, its ceiling stretching so high that it seemed to disappear into the darkness above. At the center of the room stood an enormous pedestal, atop which rested a crystal, black and iridescent, pulsing with energy. Sarai approached the pedestal cautiously, her breath catching in her throat. The crystal seemed to resonate with something deep inside her, an instinct she couldn't explain. It was as though the crystal was calling to her, drawing her in, but she hesitated. What if it was a trap? What if this was all part of some ancient design, a test set by the unknown forces that had built this place? She reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched the surface of the crystal. The moment her skin made contact, a surge of energy coursed through her, filling her mind with images, sounds, and visions that were too vast to comprehend. She saw the rise and fall of civilizations, of species long forgotten, and of a force so powerful that it had shaped the galaxy itself. The crystal was not just a relic. It was a key to understanding everything. Sarai staggered back, her heart racing, her mind reeling from the flood of information. She saw the truth. The galaxy was not merely a collection of worlds and species. It was part of something far older, something that had existed long before humanity's first steps into the stars. The memory pact was not the true enemy. The true enemy was far more ancient, more dangerous, and more elusive than anyone could have imagined. Sarai's voice trembled as she spoke. We're not fighting just for survival. We're fighting for something much bigger than ourselves. The crew stood silent, awe and fear written on their faces. Sarai knew now that the rebellion was not just about winning a war. It was about awakening something that could either save or destroy everything. The Citadel's secrets had been revealed, but the true battle was only just beginning. The visions from the crystal continued to swirl in Sarai's mind, a torrent of alien landscapes, shattered worlds, and echoes of voices long silenced. Each image was more incomprehensible than the last, but one thing was clear. The forces that had once governed the galaxy were far more ancient and far more dangerous than anything humanity had ever encountered. What Sarai had thought was an ordinary rebellion against a corrupt Earth government had revealed itself to be the first tremors of a much larger conflict, one that could unravel everything. Sarai's breath came in shallow gasps as she stumbled back from the pedestal, her body drenched in a cold sweat. The crew gathered around her, their faces a mix of confusion and concern. Mikhail Reyes was the first to speak, his voice tense but steady. "Admiral, are you all right?" She looked up at him, still disoriented. The room around her seemed to shift. the walls flickering as if the citadel itself was responding to her presence. "I don't know," Sarai said, her voice shaking. "This place, it's not just a relic. It's alive. It's part of something older than the galaxy itself. What we've been fighting for, what we thought was our last hope. It's only the beginning." Mikhail's brow furrowed as he processed her words. "What do you mean? What is this place? What's inside your head?" Sarai swallowed, trying to steady herself. "The crystal, it's showing me things that I can barely understand, but the war we're fighting, the rebellion, it's all part of a much larger plan. The memory pact isn't the real enemy. There's something older, something far worse." She paused, the weight of her words heavy in the air. "We thought we were fighting for our survival, but now I realize we're not just fighting for humanity. We're fighting to stop something that could destroy the entire galaxy." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The implications of Sarai's revelation hung heavily between them, casting a long shadow of fear and doubt. But there was no time for contemplation. They had come too far to turn back, and the galaxy was still teetering on the edge of destruction. They had to find a way to stop the forces that were awakening, to prevent the chaos that the crystal had shown them from consuming everything. Sarai took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "We need to get back to the Indomitable and prepare for what's coming. We have no idea what we're up against, but we can't let the galaxy fall into the hands of whatever ancient power is stirring. The rebellion, it's just the first wave of what's coming. We have to stop it before it's too late." Mikhail nodded, his expression grim. "Then we need to get to Aegis 7. The battle there might not be over, but it's the only foothold we have left. If we're going to make a stand, it has to be there." Sarai hesitated for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Aegis 7 was humanity's last stronghold, and if it fell, so would their hopes for survival. But she knew that they couldn't fight this war in the dark any longer. The Citadel had shown her that the rebellion, the war with Earth, and the memory pact, these were mere distractions compared to what lay ahead. She looked at Mikhail, determination in her eyes. "Prepare the ship. We leave for Aegis 7 immediately." As the crew returned to the Indomitable, Sarai couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing against something far more powerful than they could ever imagine. The ancient forces that had been awakened were stirring, and the galaxy's fate hung in the balance. The memory pact might have been the immediate threat, but they were only pawns in a far grander game. Once aboard the ship, Sarai stood on the bridge, gazing out at the expanse of stars stretching before them. There was no longer any illusion of safety. No matter what happened, the galaxy was changing and humanity's place in it was uncertain. The rebellion, the fight for survival, it was all just the beginning. Mikhail's voice broke through her thoughts. "Admiral, we've entered the warp. Aegis 7 is in our sights." Sarai nodded, the weight of their mission settling heavily on her. "Good. We'll need every ship we can muster, every ally we have." As they hurtled toward Aegis 7, Sarai couldn't help but wonder how much longer humanity could hold on. The rebellion, once a symbol of hope, was now a desperate struggle to stay afloat in a galaxy that was rapidly slipping into chaos. And beyond the war, beyond the memory pact, lay something far worse. Something that, if left unchecked, would bring about the end of all things. The ancient forces had awoken. The battle for survival was no longer just about defeating Earth or the memory pact. It was about stopping a force that had been hidden for eons, a force that could reshape the very fabric of the galaxy. They were running out of time. The Indomitable raced through the void, its engines humming with purpose as it carried Sarai and her crew toward Aegis 7. Every moment felt like an eternity. The weight of the Citadel's revelations pressed down on Sarai's chest like a physical burden. The galaxy had been teetering on the edge of chaos for years, but now, after glimpsing the truth through the crystal, it was clear. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to keep an ancient force from rising again, a force that could sweep across the stars, erasing everything in its path. Sarai's mind kept returning to the crystal, to the visions it had shown her. She had seen civilizations rise and fall, vast empires built on the backs of unknown species, only to crumble into dust when the ancient force stirred. The galaxy wasn't just a collection of empires and factions. It was a battleground for something far more primordial, a war that spanned eons. The rebellion, the fight against Earth's government, the uprising of the Memory Pact. It was all a distraction, a spark igniting the powder keg of a much greater conflict. She stared out of the viewport at the stars, their light distant and cold. The Indomitable had passed into the outer reaches of Aegis VI's orbit, and ahead of them lay the final confrontation. If they could hold the line there, it would buy them time. But for what? Sarai wasn't sure anymore. She had seen the truth. She had glimpsed the galaxy's hidden history, and now nothing seemed certain. Would humanity survive? Or would they be swept away by the ancient force that had been hidden for so long? Mikhail Reyes approached her, his footsteps soft on the bridge, and Sarai turned to face him. "Admiral, we've received word from the rebel fleet. They're holding the outer perimeter, but the enemy forces are growing stronger. Earth's reinforcements are arriving in waves." Sarai's jaw tightened. The battle for Aegis 7 had become the final stand for humanity's resistance. If Earth regained control of Aegis, it would be a crushing blow, not just to the rebellion, but to the entire galaxy. They couldn't afford to lose this fight. But Sarai knew that victory on the battlefield wasn't the end. It was merely a temporary reprieve. "We need more time," Sarai muttered. She wasn't sure if she was talking to Mikhail or to herself. "If we can just hold out long enough, we might be able to figure out how to stop whatever is coming. But time is running out." Mikhail nodded grimly. "We've already committed everything we have. The Indomitable will hold the line with the rest of the fleet." Sarai took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The rebellion had been her life's work, but it was becoming increasingly clear that the war they were fighting was just a precursor to something much worse. She glanced at the ship's monitor, which displayed the various rebel fleets scattered around Aegis VI's orbital defenses. There were only a handful of ships left, and the Earth forces outnumbered them by 10 to 1. The odds were grim, but Sarai refused to give in to despair. If they could just keep fighting long enough, something would change. She had to believe that. "We'll fight until the last ship is standing," Sarai said with a determination that cut through the tension in the air. "But we need to be ready for what comes after." Mikhail didn't reply. Instead, he turned back to the communications console, relaying orders to the other ships in the fleet. Sarai watched him for a moment, then turned her gaze back to the stars. Aegis 7, once a symbol of hope, was now the crucible in which humanity's future would be decided. Sarai wasn't sure if they would survive the battle to come, but she knew they had no other choice but to try. The ancient force that had been awakened wasn't waiting for them to figure things out. It was already out there, stirring in the deep spaces, and if humanity was to survive, they would have to make the most of the time they had left. As the Indomitable entered Aegis VI's atmosphere, Sarai gathered her thoughts. She would lead her people in this battle, but she would also have to lead them through the unknown. Whatever the ancient force was, whatever the crystal had shown her, it was clear that the galaxy's true test wasn't on the battlefield. It was in what came after. The ship landed with a soft thud, and the crew swiftly began preparations for the final assault. Sarai's heart pounded in her chest, not just from the fight that awaited them, but from the overwhelming sense of responsibility that now weighed on her shoulders. The truth had been revealed, but she had no idea what would happen once the dust settled. Would they still have a chance to rebuild, or would they be forced to live with the consequences of something far worse? "Admiral," Mikhail called, pulling Sarai out of her reverie. "It's time." She nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a fight for Aegis 7. It was a fight for everything: humanity's survival, the galaxy's future, and the unknown forces that were pulling the strings. Sarai stood tall, her eyes steely with resolve. "Let's make sure we're ready. For everything, The doors to the Indomitable's landing bay slid open, and the final assault on Aegis 7 began. The battlefield was no longer just a place of soldiers and weapons. It was a place of destiny, and Sarai knew deep down that whatever happened next would change the galaxy forever. The battle for Aegis 7 raged around them. The sky above thick with smoke, and the air heavy with the hum of energy weapons and the roar of engines. The rebel fleet had engaged Earth's reinforcements in full force, but Sarai knew that victory here, if it could be called a victory at all, would be fleeting. Every moment was a gift, and every second they held the line was one step closer to facing whatever dark truth awaited them beyond the battlefield. The Indomitable was at the heart of the conflict, surrounded by the last remnants of the rebel fleet. Aegis 7 was the last stronghold, the last place that could provide humanity with a foothold to resist Earth's military might. Sarai's fingers gripped the command console, her eyes scanning the chaos unfolding on the external monitors. The battle was fierce, but the rebel ships were taking heavy losses. With each strike, the odds seemed to stack against them. Sarai couldn't afford to lose focus, couldn't afford to doubt herself, even though the weight of what lay beyond the battle pressed on her every thought. She'd seen the truth, the ancient force stirring beneath the surface of the galaxy, and she knew that the rebellion was just the beginning. The war was no longer just about resisting Earth. It was about stopping an ancient power that had been lying dormant for eons, waiting for the right moment to reawaken. And they were running out of time. Admiral Mikhail's voice crackled over the comms, snapping her from her thoughts. "We've lost contact with the outer fleets. We're on our own out here." Sarai's jaw clenched, but she didn't let the panic rise. "Hold the line," she commanded, her voice steady. "We can't let them through the outer defenses. We have to buy more time." The battle continued to rage around them, but Sarai felt a shift in the air, a strange pull. It was the same sensation she had felt when she had touched the crystal in the Citadel. The galaxy was shifting, and whatever ancient power lay dormant, whatever it was that had caused the rise and fall of civilizations long before humanity had even reached the stars, was stirring once again. She turned away from the comms and looked out at the battle unfolding, but her thoughts drifted back to the crystal. She had seen the endgame, and the truth was horrifying. The war against Earth, the rebellion, these were just a prelude. The galaxy was on the brink of something far more dangerous, and if they didn't act now, the consequences would be catastrophic. "Admiral," Mikhail's voice returned, but this time it was urgent. "The enemy's pushing through. The planetary defenses are failing. We can't hold them much longer." Sarai gritted her teeth. There was no time left. The rebellion's last hope was crumbling, and the galaxy's fate was slipping through their fingers. But something inside her stirred, something deep within her that couldn't let go of the fight. It was as if the very core of her being was screaming that this wasn't over, that humanity had a chance, no matter how slim. Sarai turned to Mikhail, her voice filled with a quiet resolve. "Prepare the ship for a full assault. We're going in." The crew was in motion, preparing for what they knew would be the final push. Sarai had no illusions left about what was happening. The battle for Aegis 7 was just a distraction, a diversion. But it was the only fight they had left, and it had to count. They couldn't afford to lose. As the Indomitable shot toward the heart of the battlefield, Sarai's mind raced. The crystal had shown her glimpses of what was to come, but it hadn't prepared her for the reality of it. The enemy was more than just Earth's forces. It was an ancient power, a force that transcended the petty squabbles of human empires. But there was hope, too. There was always hope, even when it seemed impossible. She could feel it now. The pull of the crystal, the strange resonance that had awakened inside her when she had touched it. It was guiding her, showing her the way forward, even as the chaos of the battle raged around them. The Indomitable made its final descent toward the surface of Aegis 7, and Sarai knew what she had to do. The galaxy wasn't just fighting to survive. It was fighting to overcome the ancient force that had shaped everything. If they could reach the heart of the battle, if they could find a way to stop the enemy from rising, They could still have a future. She didn't know how much time they had left, but she would fight until the very end. For humanity, for the galaxy, for everything. The Indomitable landed with a shudder, its engines straining against the weight of the atmosphere. Sarai stepped onto the battlefield, her eyes steely with determination. The final confrontation was upon them, and she had no choice but to face whatever was coming. As the last of the rebel ships fought in the distance, Sarai led her team toward the heart of the conflict. The ancient forces were awakening, but Sarai was ready. The galaxy would never forget the day humanity stood at the edge of oblivion and refused to back down. The battle for the future had only just begun.